Well, good morning, everybody. This is True Seeker here. um, First items first, just to get that out of the way. I get a lot of comments on this sweatshirt. My kids got it for me on my last birthday, and now that the weather is cool, I have started wearing it, and everywhere I go, it seems like the kids today have this thing for Albert Einstein because the reaction I get from young people is amazing. I've had so many call out and saying, "Hey, that's a cool T-shirt." Be quite honest with you, um, the making of these videos for the Bible students and Jehovah's Witness and my commenting and all that isn't really my passion. I think it's important work because of the damage that it can do, that these religions can do, these high control groups have done psychologically to individuals. And I believe it's actually important to speak out about them, to do what you can. I mean, I know in my case, I'm limited. I'm really not a notable individual, but I think every voice counts. And I've seen that even though I only have 244 subscribers, that number has grown over the over the last year, and it's continuing to grow. So it's reaching people, and no question that some of these videos are helpful to individuals. I wish I could do more, but this is about the best I can do. Lately, I've learned a couple of things that I wasn't aware about. I always get comments on videos. Usually, they're nice comments, supportive, and let's see. I just want to make sure that I'm getting a video voice here. Huh. Okay, I'm getting sound. This software sometimes doesn't work well, and one of these days I'm going to have to use something other than my Mac's um, microphone because it's not that high a quality, and I like the sound that these larger mics with the big puffy wall, they pick up a better tone and soften the tinniness or harshness out of the voice, but that's another matter. As I was saying, I think it's important work to talk about these things because it's damaging people's lives. My real passion, not obviously, but actually, is mathematics. And I had hoped to make and put up a YouTube site that would help individuals with mathematics because I believe that that's an area that we in this country don't do a very good job on in educating our young people. We have relied too much on computers, calculators, and things like that. We're not teaching kids to think. And I had a professor who won the National Professor of the Year award back in 1985, 84. he was my mentor in college, and his name was Dr. Charles Pine, and he had won the National Professor of the Year award from the Carnegie Mellon Institute for Teaching Excellence for his methods of teaching mathematics. And I was one of 5 students he had that year, and he was just a fantastic human being. I've always wanted to do something in tribute to him because he changed my life. When I was ready to drop out of college as a result of the criticism that I got for being at the Dawn and going to college at the same time, you can't believe the amount of criticism that I got from people who I thought were friends and people who thought I was taking advantage of the Dawn, even though it was offered by the Dawn, by Kenneth Nail, who ran the Dawn. They needed a cook, and my wife was willing to do that. She was talented in that way. She had the energy and the strength to do the job. It was the most physically demanding job at the Dawn. And I could, as an auto mechanic, I had mechanical skills. I was a fully certified auto mechanic. And I repaired equipment. I maintained the yards. I did whatever I could, whenever I could, as a result of whatever time I had that was allowed me to do so when I wasn't in school, and I didn't accept any of the stipend. They paid a monthly stipend of $150 a month to their volunteers. I did not accept that stipend. The Dawn did not contribute financially to my education. My father-in-law did. Even my own parents didn't contribute financially to my education. My father, frankly, wasn't supportive of me getting an education. It was tough. It was really tough, and I was ready to quit. I was ready to drop out. I was really in depression, and I was doing really well in college. It was the first time in my life I was doing well in school, because school was never emphasized with us kids. And I was honestly thinking of going back to turning a wrench, being an auto mechanic again, and quitting school in my last year of college. And it was by chance that this amazing professor, Dr. Pine, and I still have a notebook literally that thick of all the problems that we had solved in his class. It was called Math Applications to Physics. I was a physics major in my undergraduate. And that he had an approach to mathematics and to calculus. We went from pre-calculus all the way to partial differential equations in 2 semesters, using intuitive approaches to solving the problems. There was no book for the class. We only used his notes. And I'm one of those very few students that benefited from his professorship. He was written up in the New York Times several times, and for his teaching mathematics, and he also, as I mentioned, won the National Professor of the Year award. So we had 3 television news crews come in, and being one of only 5 students in the class, I was interviewed, and I did make it on television news. My 15 minutes of fame, I guess you could call that. That was a famous statement by that artist, Andy Warhol. Oh, God, my memory. It's tough getting old. But anyway, I wanted to put up a YouTube site. That's my passion, is mathematics, and using that information that he had and giving back to students the loss, because he died only a couple years after I had him as a professor. And I have these notes and I want to be able to use them. I didn't finish my story. I was ready to quit school, and I had a chance encounter with Dr. Pine. I had already had him as a professor. He had been a tremendous inspiration to me. We were quite friendly with one another. I'm going to clean that up a little bit. And I was ready to quit. Honestly, I was really ready to quit college. And because of the criticism that I had and really encountered as I was getting closer to graduation, it was getting worse. And it was at conventions, general convention, at the Dawn itself, there were many individuals there that thought it was wrong for me to be going to college, even though it was a deal that I had worked with, that actually had been offered to other Bible student, young Bible student individuals at that time, and some did take up that offer. I wasn't the first, although I was the only one that did complete my college education while we were at the Dawn. I also did more than my share of work at the Dawn. There's no question about that. And doing whatever I could, whenever I could. And I was really ready to walk out of my education, despite having done well in college. And this chance encounter in the cafeteria, Dr. Pine never ate in the cafeteria, the college cafeteria. He must have been desperate because he used to bring his own lunch to work. And we saw each other. We hadn't seen each other in a little while, and he invited me to sit down with him and have lunch. And he noticed that there must have been something in my demeanor that wasn't right. Maybe I was showing some discomfort. Anyway, he asked me what's wrong, and I told him frankly what the situation was, what my living situations was, what my religious affiliation, and he asked me to go to his office with him after we finished eating, and so we did. I had some time, and we actually did sit down and talk, and he told me that he thought it would be criminal for me to give up on my education, that in the 40 years that he had, I don't want to or mean to brag in this area, but he did say it. And he told me that after 40 years as a professor at Rutgers University, he said that I was the brightest student that he had encountered. It was something between us that clicked. There was just the way he thought that clicked. And there wasn't a day in his class that it was like, oh, so that's it. I had already had 3 basic calculus courses, Calc 1 through 3, and ordinary differential equations. And Dr. Pine just put all of that in a way that, I did well in those courses, but I didn't have the intuitive, fundamental understanding. And what he did was he bridged that understanding. And it was like, so that's what that was about. And, I didn't think about it at the time, but Isaac Newton, when he thought of calculus, he used tables. He didn't have this full-blown theory of the fundamental theorem of calculus using sums, infinite sums, and definitions of function having to be continuous in its domain, whether it's an open or closed domain, and all of this other stuff that is essential, but it doesn't. You begin to throw on so many conditions and items to the basic idea, and you lose the idea. And that's what Dr. Pine was able to do, was to peel away unnecessary aspects and think the way the person who invented this was thinking, and presented it that way, and it clicked. And you see, this is my passion. Fibonacci numbers are my passion. I'm not a mathematician, and I've had a number of problems published in an academic journal called the Fibonacci Quarterly. Not because I'm smart, but because this is fascinating stuff to me. And I just love it. And that's really my heart. That's where I am. And that's what I plan to do, and have always planned to do. When I retire, I want to help people learn mathematics, because I think it teaches them to think. It teaches them to show how things work logically, because that's what mathematics is. It's an extension of logic, and it teaches you to think. And yes, it took me a while to dislodge the notions that had been indoctrinated into me all my life. But after college, what I had been taught seemed less and less reasonable. One of the first things that I had to trash, basically, was the concept of chronology and the Bible chronology, because we were using techniques in engineering, because I went on to engineering school. It's environmental engineering really is a branch of civil engineering, and I went on to graduate school in environmental engineering because I had 2 young daughters and a wife to support. I would have loved to continue with physics, but I would have needed a PhD in physics, and time was such that I just couldn't do that. Physics requires so much intense work. And so I went to night school, and I majored in engineering and became an environmental engineer. And I felt a strong sense of social conscientiousness, I guess you could say, that it was a noble enterprise, and that I honestly believed that the environment was important. So I majored in environment, and I did that as a professional for the last 30 years, or 35 years now. God, time's going by. But I've done well. I have absolutely no complaints about the choices I've made. But mathematics has always been my passion, and since college. And I did try to reconcile the Bible as much as I could with my education, but over time it became increasingly difficult to do so. And one by one, the dominoes fell. They fell in slow motion, grantedly, but they fell. And one of the first things that fell was the fact that evolution absolutely is real. That it was not a fabrication. That evolution is how um, species came to be. I came up, or I didn't come up, but I had this notion of design, intelligent design for a while, but accepting the science behind things because to me the science was irrefutable. It was undeniable. I was using the very science that went into dating and dating items that support the concepts of evolution. First order decay rates is how so much of when you look at what they call unit operations designs in wastewater treatment, mixing problems and other problems which are critical in engineering are first order decay law. And things like dilution and mixing. And so we had all of these things that we were using, this mathematics that we were using. That is the one thing that you learn in engineering is that if you're an electrical engineer or if you're a mechanical engineer, the same fundamental equations, differential equations, apply across the different disciplines. It's just tailoring these fundamental mathematical equations and approaches to the specific problem. But they're the same mathematical equations. And the same thing in chemistry. You use first order decay laws for all sorts of things. It just is the way nature works. And that's also the way radioactive decay works. And radioactive decay is how objects, radioactive materials, transform or transmute into other elements. For example, U-238 has what they call a half-life. If you start out with a lump of uranium, after 4.5 billion years, you're going to have half the lump. And after another 4.5 billion years, you're going to have a quarter of the original lump, and so on. And it decays accordingly. Imagine me drawing a curve, a little exponentially decaying curve. That's the mathematics behind the way nature behaves. But nature behaves this way in many other ways. The first order decay laws occur in dilutions. The first order decay law is how bacteria use the substrate that they grow in a culture dish. First order decay laws are used everywhere. And so this brings me to some of the recent discussion that I've had with my cousin, who went to school, I understand, for mathematics. When I say school, I mean, I believe he did get an undergraduate degree in mathematics. But the problem with mathematics is that you need mathematics in and of itself is beautiful. There's no question about it. There's a beauty in solving problems and the logical steps from getting from A to B and getting certain results and the connections. to those results. But you can also be a hack and use legitimate mathematics to demonstrate or awe or bedazzle individuals with your intellect on something that's completely hack. If the premise is unsound, then everything else that it's based on is unsound, no matter how true it may be or look. If the fundamental basis is wrong, then everything about it is wrong. And this is what people should understand and be able to differentiate. Is the premise sound? Is the basis upon which all of this intellectual looking stuff, does it mean something? Is it real? I'm going to come back in 1 minute because I'm really dying for coffee. I just woke up about 20 minutes ago and I need to get that coffee. So I'll be back in 1 second. And I'm not even going to turn it off because when I turn it off, I'm afraid that something's going to happen with the sound. So there's going to be a blank second here. So please forgive me. Okay, I'm back again. So this brings me back to some of the dialogue that I've had with my cousin, and this dialogue I found had its basis in the General Convention. This back in July, and apparently there are Bible students who've seen me on the internet, YouTube, and other, I guess, channels. I done an interview with Lloyd Evans on the Cedars channel. I have obviously this small channel, and I did a couple of videos with Lloyd, and it's apparently, for those who still remember me and the Bible students, it stirred a little bit of stirred the pot a bit, I guess. And I think this is the reason why my cousin has actually been dialoguing with me, because he's been noted as being one of the Bible student intellectuals with his detailed studies in Bible chronology. And actually, even though we're first cousins, he's never really had much of either an interest or dialogue with me. Because our interests weren't in the air. I guess I wasn't intellectual enough. I don't know. I didn't show enough interest in Bible chronology and getting into the weeds and details of figuring out numbers and when kings lived and this and that kind of level of detail. You see, he doesn't have much in the way of life. Let's put it that way. His entire life is the Bible students, and he's married, and I guess he did well enough for himself in the printing business, but he lives in a nice enough neighborhood in San Diego, and expensive out there in California. But he has no other distractions, and he has been able to devote his entire attention to these excruciating studies into Bible chronology. Well, somehow this has turned into a debate, and he's thrown everything at me. I make no question about it. I am what would be called an agnostic atheist. Although, when it comes to the Bible, I think that I'm pretty certain that I can discount the Bible and the God that's presented in that Bible, because I believe the Bible can be refuted, and if the Bible can be refuted, then the God in that Bible, described in that Bible, can be refuted. In the same way that the teachings of the Quran can be discounted by Christians, or the what is it, the Bhagavad Gita, I don't know how to say it, I haven't even studied it, or the Book of Mormon can be discounted by most Christians offhand without having to go into the Book of Mormon and read it in detail and go into deep studies to show the errors of the way of Mormon. They can pretty much discount it offhand from pretty rather simple logical means, and that's the way I think about the Bible. And we have entered into this dialogue, and he's thrown everything pretty much at me, and which, to some extent, I'm a little surprised, because Bible students are wary of outside entities, because there's Christendom, who has been deceived by Satan. Just like the Jehovah's Witnesses would not accept Christian claims, they call them nominal Christendom, because they believe that they're only Christian in name. They're not true Christians. The Baptists, the Catholics, every other Christian denomination, the only Christians that are true Christians are Jehovah's Witnesses. They have the truth. And they can discount pretty much offhand other Christian claims, because the idea is that Satan, there's the parable of the sower, where the sower, Jesus, planted this true seed, and it was wheat seed. And as men slept, some evil one came and sowed the tares among the wheat. And the idea is that the tares and the wheat grew up together, and you couldn't differentiate until they fruited. And fruiting being the seed heads, and the tares not producing fruit, whereas the true wheat did. And at the harvest, the wheat, which was ripe, was separated in bundles, and the tares were separated, bundled up, and burned and destroyed. So that represented the destruction of nominal Christendom. And this goes all the way back to Russell. This is the way he interpreted things. And so it's a little surprising, because most Bible students will not accept nominal Christian logic, dogma, whatever, because they're concerned about satanic influence into their doctrines, and how that the angel of light or the angel of darkness could seem like the angel of light. There's a scripture that talks about that in the New Testament. I can't get the quote immediately, but that's part of the reason I need this coffee. Clear my throat a little. But anyway, Bible students have generally believed that they alone have the truth of all the peoples in the world, and usually don't use outside entities to argue their points, which then surprised me a little bit because my cousin, through a number of nominal Christian sources at me to prove my atheism wrong. And he, Prager University, Discovery Institute, which is a old Earth creationist, Hugh Ross, old Earth creationist, Hoover Institute, which sponsored some kind of a discussion forum on, you can find it on YouTube. It's the mathematical improbability of evolution. And none of these guys are qualified to talk about. They had a panel of 3 plus the moderator. It was sponsored by this Hoover Institute, and the members of this had credentials. They were throwing credentials, authority, argumentation from authority, using their credentials. Like Hugh Ross is a legitimate astronomer. They use that to basically beat you down and using authority, that you're not qualified. They are, to make these judgments. Well, the fact of the matter is, one was a professor from Yale University, but his degree is in art, and he teaches in computer science. And I'm thinking, how does a guy from computer science at Yale, how does a guy with an art degree get to teach computer science, or part of the computer science department at Yale? And it dawned on me, it's simple. Graphic design. Computers are used mostly to make CPA, what do they call it? CGA, right? So he was an artist. That was his training, and Hebrew studies. He wasn't in any, first off, there was a tremendous bias. He believed in his religious convictions, and so he's not looking at evolution from an open-minded point of view, but he was not qualified to talk about evolution. And neither was this crazy mathematician who laid back and with his long hair and looked so erudite, and he was obviously an image-driven narcissist. But that doesn't matter. An image-driven narcissist can still be right. But this guy came right out and said, I thought I had a really good proof, mathematical proof for God. But then I found out, I discovered later that it was bunk. But it was a great attempt anyway. And who can take a guy like that seriously? Who, tried to prove mathematically that God exists, and finally came to the realization that it can't be done. But it was a good attempt anyway. That it was still worthy of merit. And this is the guy that they're using for the mathematics of probability of evolution. You want to talk about improbability. Now, what is the probability of you being born? Well, let's take a look at the improbability of it, okay? First off, what are there? 50,000 sperms, okay, per sexual encounter, okay? So right there off the bat, there was one sperm that fertilized the egg that made you in that event that took place to create you, that fertilization that ultimately led to your existence. Okay, so that's a 1 in 50,000 chance. Well, your parents had that same chance. And in fact, actually, the probability is even worse than that because there were multiple attempts. You didn't come about until that particular event. So you're really you're taking the odds 1 in 50,000, or is it 1 in 100,000? I forget what the sperm count is. And you're multiplying it against the number of times that it took to get you to be to the event that led to you. And then that same improbability applies to your parents. Okay, so you have 2 parents. And then you have 4 grandparents and 8 great-grandparents. And it goes back as what they call a geometric progression. That is 2 to the n. 2 raised to the n. Okay, so 2 to the 0 is 1. 2 to the 1 is 2. 2 to the 2 is 4. 2 to the 3 is 8. And it goes on, as a geometric progression backwards to some point in time where you have to be, the entire population has to exist in order for you to exist. And you take a look at that and you say, well, the odds of you being born are essentially 0. But they're not, because you exist. So the probability is 100% for your existence, because you do exist. You see, this is the logical fallacies that can mislead people using mathematics to the wrong conclusion. Now, if I said I wanted to make a prediction going out in the future of who my great-great-great-great-grandson would be, or granddaughter, I couldn't make that prediction because of those odds. But it all is a matter of your perspective. The fact that you exist today means that you could toss out all of those probabilities because you did come into existence. You're here. And so this is the danger that you have, the logical flaws that exist in applying mathematics to such things as the likelihood of evolution. And so that's the problem with that, and the fact that these people are predisposed to not believing in evolution anyway, because they take the Bible and accept the Bible's explanation for it. Excuse me. So there's my rebut to my cousin who discounted the dating because I had just cut to the chase. I didn't want to go into this. I didn't want to go into the woods with him. Okay, forgetting the forest for the tree, not being able to see the forest for the trees. Taking the bigger perspective and looking at the fact that what is the basis of the Bible student teaching? Well, that Adam was the progenitor of the race, and as in Adam all die, even so in Christ all shall be made alive. That Christ offered himself as a substitution, as a perfect man, the only other perfect man that was ever made, who willingly offered himself instead of Adam, in the place of Adam, and in the place of taking on the sentence and the penalty of Adam's transgression, and thereby releasing Adam. Now, there are all kinds of problems with this idea, and I'm not going to go into everything. If you think about them, there you could see the injustice. I mean, the fact that if somebody committed a murder and somebody who didn't commit a murder at the end of a trial, and we're at the sentencing phase, somebody came up who hadn't done the murder and says to the judge, Judge, I'd like to take this guy's place in jail. I want to be his substitution. Because I haven't committed murder. I am innocent in that sense, and I'm not a murderer. So, apply the sentence to me, and we'll redeem or release this individual who committed the murder, and we'll set him free. There's no justice in that. No judge in the world is going to do that. But then the Bible students say, well, this proves God's love. Well, then why go through the whole justice business to begin with if God's going to circumvent justice with love? Why do that? Why did he send his son down to die? So the Bible students have everything all mixed up in their heads, and it seems to make sense in some way, but it doesn't really when you stop and you think about the entire thing. And on top of that, how could God be just if Adam didn't have the ability to discern between good and evil to begin with? He lacked this ability to discern good and evil, and I know I've gone through this argument before eating the fruit. It was the tree of knowledge of good and evil that was being prohibited by. And why? Why would God want them not to know between good and evil? But the fact was that until they ate the fruit, Eve and Adam didn't have this ability to discern what was right and wrong and what they did as being wrong. So how could God judge them righteously? So there are all kinds of issues with this the cornerstone of the Bible student's doctrine. And so if Adam, anyway, it requires that Adam be the progenitor of the human race in order to redeem the human race or set free the human race with the ransom sacrifice. And this was Russell's idea, that it was a nifty trick on the part of God by sentencing Adam to death, because it only then required the redemption of one person to set millions free, or billions. And so this little trick that Russell, was saying, look at the wisdom of God in doing all this. But God didn't have to do any of it. All he had to do was forgive Adam. Oh, but humans had to go through this experience. Why? Why couldn't he have just created humans with the ability to discern right and wrong and judge them on that basis? And in the kingdom, they're going to be judged individually anyway, according to the Bible students. So why not have started out that way? It just doesn't make sense. So it requires Adam, the Bible students' belief requires Adam to be the progenitor of the race. Let's not get in the weeds here. Okay, so we can take the Bible from Jesus, and we know when Jesus allegedly lived. There's some question today as to whether or not Jesus actually lived. I mean, there's, what's his name? Richard Carrier, Dr. Richard Carrier, who had done a Bayesian analysis. That's a type of statistical analysis looking at the probability of the existence of Jesus. And I think he came up with there's as much as a 1/3 or 33% possibility that Jesus did not exist. Or maybe I have it flipped, maybe it's 2/3. But anyway, I think it breaks down into thirds somehow, and there's a high probability that Jesus didn't exist. But, according to this analysis, to me, it doesn't matter if Jesus did or didn't exist. And I don't even have an opinion as to whether or not he did. It doesn't matter. Because the Bible can be proven wrong in the first chapter. The whole Bible can be proven wrong because the first chapter lays down the premise for the rest of the Bible, which is salvation from the actions that took place in the first and second and third chapters of Genesis. So if you know that those chapters are wrong, then why go through all the trouble of analyzing where something may be valid or not valid? And as I pointed out to my cousin in some of these rebuts, just because Spider-Man is set in contemporary New York City and that many of the people and things that are referenced in that graphic novel do really exist, doesn't imply logically that Spider-Man exists. It's fiction, and it's fiction set in a backdrop of truth. And that's what a lot of the Bible is. And so, yes, there are events that may be recounted in the Bible that were historically accurate. But that doesn't make the Bible accurate. That's the problem. And if you can show where the Bible is actually very, very, very wrong, and you can do that at the first chapters of Genesis, and cast more than a strong shadow of doubt on the first chapter of Genesis, you don't have to go through all that detailed analysis and argumentation about the proof of the Bible and that it's true. Although there's so many ways that you can show that it isn't. So, and eventually, I didn't want to get dragged into these detailed discussions, especially in chronology, because my cousin could talk Bible circles all around me in chronology. So taking the Bible chronology and leading everything back to Adam, because that's what Bible chronology does. It sets you back step by step, generation by generation, from Jesus to Adam, and we can put that together fairly accurately using the Bible. Adam lived some 6,000 years ago, give or take a few years, if you look at the Bible chronology. The same Bible chronology that my cousin has dug deeply into to make projections about when the kingdom is going to come. And that's his main interest, is to forecast the coming 1,000-year kingdom. And I think he does have a date. He's given seminars on this. And these seminars are on YouTube. And I think there was a weekend seminar, a retreat that he had established. And it looked like a fairly sizable number of Bible students that attended this thing. But regardless, it's that same Bible chronology that leads back to the time of Adam. And the Bible student doctrine requires that Adam be the progenitor of the human race. Well, we have irrefutable evidence that humans predated Adam. Adam lived some 6,000 years ago, if you go back through the Bible chronology. And in Africa, Homo sapiens, our species, have been found that date back to hundreds of thousands of years. Okay, from geologic time, the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, or in that neighborhood. That's a very, very small period of time. But, relative to Bible chronology, 300,000 years, or let's say if it's 150,000 years, we have evidence of Homo sapiens living that far back in time. We have graveyards, mass graveyards in the Sahara Desert that have been unearthed and studied that are over 10,000 years old. We know that the Aborigines have lived in Australia as far back as 50,000 years ago. 50,000 years ago. That's more than 10 times the age of Adam, going back to when Adam supposedly lived. We have genetic evidence that there was interbreeding or marriage between Neanderthals, which are a separate species of human, with Homo sapiens, and they believe that this occurred somewhere in the Levant or the Middle East area, and into Europe when Homo sapiens migrated from Africa into Europe. Now, none of the Africans have this genetics of Neanderthals incorporated in their genome. but Europeans do. Up to 4% of our DNA, those of European descent, are made up of Neanderthal genetics, and they can identify what genes we obtained and what it does for us. They can trace the contribution of Neanderthal to the human genome, or Homo sapiens genome, because Neanderthals were human. They were a different species of human, just as tigers are a different species of cat from lion. But you can interbreed a lion and a tiger, and you've got a liger. And they're huge. They weren't close enough to be viable, as a separate species. But different species are close enough to be viable, and one of them is the wolf and coyote. And an entirely new species has arisen called the coy wolf. And if you look at ANOVA, there is a NOVA called Coy Wolf, a NOVA scientific presentation called Coy Wolf, where as North America depopulated as a result of the Europeans invading the U.S. and taking out of the natives, that the Aboriginal peoples that had populated North America, the Native Americans, and cultivated the land and killed species off. They pretty much exterminated the timber wolf from most of North America. And the coyote, which is a more facultative species, has taken up much of the ecological niche that the timber wolf once existed in, except up in a spot called Algonquin Park up in Canada, in Ontario, where the timber wolf, or actually a subspecies of timber wolf called the eastern wolf, still remains. And the coyote population, which was originally in the West, has migrated to Algonquin Park, and there's been interbreeding, and they have created a new species which is taking over the entire Northeast, all the way down to the Middle Atlantic states, such as Virginia. with a creature called the coy wolf, which is intermediate in size between the timber wolf and coyote. They're big. I've seen quite a few of them in our region. They're facultative as the coyote, but they're more aggressive, like the timber wolf, and do hunt in packs, whereas coyotes don't hunt in packs. And so this entirely new species is viable and has been spreading throughout the Northeast. They even live in Central Park, the greatest and most densely populated area of the United States. So there are circumstances where interbreeding with different species can occur, and it happened with humans. And that's why we, as Neanderthals, declined because their species couldn't compete with Homo sapiens, did intermarry, interbreed, and that's why we have Neanderthal genes that we can identify through our DNA sequencing, identify these Neanderthal contributions to our DNA. And so Asian populations and European populations have this DNA mix. Granted, the portion of DNA contributed by Neanderthal is small, but it's there. And it dates back hundreds, 100,000 years or more, when humans left Homo sapien humans, not Neanderthal humans, we're all human, left Africa. The only ones that don't have the Neanderthals are the Homo sapiens that remained in Africa. So we have this evidence, not only evidence, but it's proof, because we know when these people have lived. Now, coming to the Americas, there's a population. When Europeans came to North America, there were people here. The Native Americans had populated North and South America. And the idea is that at the end of the last ice age, the oceans were so low that a shallow portion of the ocean up near what we call the Bering Sea today, we call it Beringia. It was a continent that bridged the Asian and North American continents and made for a migratory pathway for not only humans, but species. For example, camels originated in North America, but are now only found in Asia and the Middle East. They migrated from North America to that area. Cheetahs were a cat that originated in North America as a species. Now, the only place where cheetahs are found are in Africa. They had migrated from North America across that land bridge to Africa, and now the only populations left of cheetahs are in Africa. But they started out in North America. We have fossils. We have those remains here showing that this is where they have originated. And in fact, the second fastest animal on the planet is the pronghorn. The pronghorn is what's that old song where the buffalo roam and the deer and the antelope play. The antelope there is the pronghorn. That's what they called antelope in those 19th century. But they're not directly related to deer in a very strong sense. You have white-tailed deer, mule deer. You have elk or wapiti, and you have moose. They're all related, closely related in the United States, and The pronghorn is not that closely related, although they do appear very similar, but there's quite a bit of difference. And they have these permanent horns with a little prong on it. That's why they call them pronghorns. And they're not a very large animal, but they're sizable enough. And they run like the dickens. They can run up to 70 miles an hour, which is as fast as a cheetah. And they can run long distances up to 15 miles at 40 miles an hour and can go even further at slower paces. These animals evolved in the presence of cheetahs. And there are all kinds of evidence that traces of the way things were in North America at certain times. Like what is it? There's a form of locust tree that has these awful thorns on it. Well, these thorns were thought to have evolved on the tree as a defense against mastodons and woolly mammoths from eating these trees. It was sort of a protective device that evolved that's still with the tree today, even though the mastodons have passed away. So these are just fascinating little things about history, about evolution, about how nature works. And we know that these people crossed from Asia into Beringia and lived and mixed and formed a culture in Beringia before moving into North America. These people had a different physical appearance that can be traced back into the population of Native Americans today that were the progenitors of the Native Americans. Now, the Native Americans, we can date back their existence in the Americas, because once they reached the Americas, there was a very rapid migration across North America and down into South America. And the distinctive traits that are known to be in Native Americans today derived from these original peoples, which had a little different physical appearance. And recently in the Yucatan, which is riddled with caves. The Yucatan's like Florida. It's all limestone, and it's riddled with caves, much of them unexplored, filled with fresh water. And people do dive in these caves. They can find all kinds of prehistoric animal bones, mastodons, and saber-toothed cats, and all different types of bones that they can find in these underwater caves, underground caves filled with water. Florida's the same way. They found the skeleton of a 16-year-old girl by the name, well, they named her. That wasn't her original name. But the scientists named her Naya, Naia. You can look her up. And the early dating has her to be about 12,000 to 13,000 years old. So that's 12,500, give or take 500 years. So that's 12,500 plus or minus 500 years. That's the level of uncertainty at this point. Okay, so it's 4%. Using dating techniques, and these are proven dating techniques. After 60 or 70 years, if you refute the validity of these dating techniques, you're just closing your eyes and burying your head to science. Because it's the very same science that we use today for so many other things. It's the same science that we use in environmental engineering to quantify. We use mass spectroscopy. We use gas chromatography. We use scintillation counting, and yes, 70 years ago, many of these things were in their rudimentary forms. But they have refined and improved the technology to measure things to such a degree that we cannot ignore the fact that they're valid dating methods. It's a desperate Hail Mary, hoping against hope, that one of the 8 or 10 guys that are down the end of the field, somebody, the right guy, is going to catch the football type of thing to try and discredit dating techniques today. They're so well refined and so well demonstrated and supported and proven to be valid that and you know, they go after carbon dating. These extremists go after carbon dating all the time. Well, carbon dating is good up to about 50,000 years because carbon-14 has a half-life of only 5,700, I think, 30 years. Okay, which means that you can only use it back to so many years. 50,000 years is about the limit at which you can reliably use carbon dating. But there are other methods. There are other isotopes that decay at different rates that allow us to be able to use different dating technologies and dating methods for different things. And we have this ability. We know how old the solar system is by looking at the components of the sun, knowing that the sun started out with hydrogen and maybe some helium, and now through the fusion process, there's knowing the rate of fusion and the amount of energy that's given off by the sun, and knowing how much energy that fused particles emit, we can calculate the expected amount of other elements that are being created by the sun. And when we look at the ratios of these elements and the composition and what elements are present, we know how long it would take for the sun to create these things. Because in the beginning, there was only hydrogen. That's it. Maybe some helium, but mostly it was just hydrogen. That's what the universe was. Everything else came from the stars. As what's his name? There's a famous astrophysicist who does speak out vocally. I can't remember his name though. As again, it's an age mental block. But he likes to say, "We are stardust." And we are, because the elements that go into our bodies came from the core of a star that at one point in its life exploded and threw these materials out into the universe. And they gathered together to form us when our solar system came together. They came to be a part of our planet Earth, and we derived from Earth. Now, one thing that is also troubling about evolution, and I think I'll make this, well, there's one other point I'd like to make, and I want to get to. I'm sorry, this is a longer video than I anticipated to make. Now I forgot what that point was. With evolution, there is this confusion between evolution and abiogenesis. Now, abiogenesis is how did life come to be? Because evolution is once life has begun, how did speciation occur? You see, evolution only deals with speciation, not the origin of life. It deals with origins in the sense of how do species originate. But it requires that life already be a part of the mix. Abiogenesis is entirely different. How did life start? And they're two different topics. You know, it's like trying to show that history is wrong because it doesn't apply to chemistry. That's a bad example, but they're that disparate, okay? Because they're different topics, different disciplines. They're dealing with different things. They're dealing with, one, how did life come to be? And two, once life did come to be, how did species come to be? That's evolution. Abiogenesis is, how did life come to be? And so they're not the same question, and they're not the same discipline. And not to get into it, because I've already gone into quite a bit of detail at this point, there's irrefutable evidence and proof that evolution took place and that it transpired over billions of years. There's no question about that. Evolution is a fact. And so don't let anybody throw that theory idea. There's the theory of gravity, okay? But when you drop a hammer and it hits your toe, you know gravity is real. The fact that occurred is something that's accepted, readily accepted in science. There are very few scientists who question evolution. It's abiogenesis where the question lies, and there's been quite a bit of advancement in the understanding of abiogenesis. Again, I'm not going to go into those details. Maybe I'll make another video, do some research in that area. I'm not a biologist. I'm an engineer. I'm a physicist. But I do know how to read, and I can understand what the experts say on things. And if people are going to throw argumentation via authority, then get an authority, okay? Not an artist or Hebrew Studies or Discovery Institute or some whacked out mathematician who thinks he's clever because he almost came up with a proof of God to disprove the probability of the mathematical improbability of evolution at me. Get Jerry Coyne, who is an expert in the very area of evolution, and look at the evidence that he provides in a book made for people like you and me who are laymen but can use our brains and read and understand and comprehend. And the book, and it was a fantastic little book, Why Evolution is True. And it's almost incredulous that a book by that title needs to be made, but it does. And he wrote it, and once you read it, you can see the beauty of evolution. Just because it doesn't fit your model of Adam as a progenitor of the race, just because dating techniques and science doesn't show that Adam is the progenitor of the race, means that you need to toss what is proven wrong out. It's unfortunate, yes, because this is what has been drummed in our heads ever since we were born. But if it's not true, why believe it? It doesn't do us any good. to try hope against hope that science is wrong. Even if we've invested most of our life in something that was wrong, the truth is far better. It's easier to live with. And so that's my appeal. So that's been going on, and I wanted to mention something else, and what I'll do is I'll make a separate video for that, because I've had a very fascinating dialogue with an individual over the last 2 days, and I think it's something that's worth mentioning. So, Jacqueline, I want to thank you, and I will make this, I'll make a little video on that topic. Even though I should be working, maybe later this afternoon I will get to work. But I do have some time. I have some coffee, and I'm going to try and make the best of what time I do have right at the moment. The kids aren't here. My grandson isn't here. We had them till last night, and it was wonderful. I love that little guy. But anyway, this is Truth Seeker wishing everybody so long, and I wish everybody well.